Hi everybody, I get the grand pleasure of talking to you all after afternoon tea, so I won't be offended if I see lots of heads banging down on the table, because it's often what I do at this time of the day as well. So I'm going to talk to you about Rotoroa Island this afternoon. Just put my glasses on so I can see. I've had the good fortune to work on a unique thing in conservation, a well-funded project. I've been doing this sort of work for about 30 years. I started off with that hugely well-funded organisation, the Department of Conservation. And, you know, I'm well used to working on projects where there hasn't been a lot of money. So Rotoroa is a little bit of a different story, and I've been asked to talk about that today. So for those of you that don't know, Rotoroa's, short person, Rotoroa's at the southern end of the Hauraki Gulf. It's sandwiched between Rati and Stoti, Waiheke and Paunui. It's 80 hectares. It's leased by the Rotoroa Island Trust, and it's owned by the Salvation Army. So it's a little story about an innovative park, an inspired partnership and a business success story. So, rejuvenation. Rotoroa had 100 years of providing hope for over 12,000 lost souls in response initially to an act which made alcoholism illegal. I think it was called the Alcohol and Inebriates Act in the early 1900s. And people returning from war, people that had just had a hard time in New Zealand, if they were alcoholics, they were chucked into jail, and the Salvation Army was very offended by that. So they bought Rotoroa and also Pakatoa Island. Rotoroa was an island that cared for people that society had given up on. It's now an island that celebrates over a century of ceaseless giving, that is the Salvation Army. Oops. Reinvention. In 2008, a novel idea was conceived to help the Sallies after recovery programs were considered better in communities and not on isolated islands, and to repay the Salvation Army's care for people. Novel ideas are how most community conservation initiatives start. With a lease paid for 100 years and funding to rejuvenate its natural environment, Rotoroa is now an island open to the public and a haven for wildlife. One man's idea, and John Gow in the top right of the photo, who lives on Waiheke and is known to many people, and a friendship with two extraordinary people, Neil and Annette Plowman down the bottom on the left, who provided the funding to do the work. We did things a little bit differently to most restoration projects. Prior to going back into contracting, I worked for Treescape, and I learnt the value of using very big machinery to do land restoration projects. I wasn't involved in this part of the project, but this is around 2008. We had this giant fire-breathing monster that ate 20,000 pine trees on the island, and they turned into this. So we had quite a big revegetation program on the island, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. It generated a lot of mulch. We were able to spread that mulch with big machines. I remember putting in stakes to say that the mulch needed to be 1 metre deep, and the guys and the diggers had great delight in burying them up to, I don't know how deep they buried it. So this is the spreading of the mulch on the southern hillsides at Rotoroa in 2009, and this is what it looked like 5 years later. So we were extraordinarily lucky that we were able to mulch these pretty crappy environments on the island. So revegetation was a very big part of what we did. We planted 300,000 trees. We were very fortunate to have that done by contractors that were planting around 8,000 to 10,000 trees a day. It was loosely based around a coastal Pahutakawa forest, and we're very grateful for Boffa Miskell, who helped us with that program. We had some artistic licence, unashamedly and openly, in regards to a species planted. Just recently, with the help of the fabulous Alison Henry, we planted kauri from Colin McCann's place in partnership with Cody 2000, and we planted Pinantia, Three Kings Kaikomako, which has one remaining tree in the wild. These are endangered species seeking sanctuary in keeping with the Sally's heritage. We generally had effective canopy coverage within 5 years of planting, And the success of our planting was measured by a reduction in weed control from over 60 species down to about 5, and by flowering and seeding of planted species and leaps in soil quality. So a really important part for us was plant selection. Hardy, early seed set plants that were sort of flags to birds, bird attractors covering the ground. Quality is really important. I know there's a lot of people with a lot of experience in the room, but these little pot 1 litre plants, when you're planting on an island like Rotoroa that just gets the wind and salt right through it, these grunty little plants are really important, and it's important to buy them from specialist nurseries. So we had the bane of the Hauraki Gulf, big empty paddocks full of kikuyu and weeds and horrid clay soils. We created a blank canvas, so we sprayed all of them out completely on a year-by-year basis. And this is the result. So this is a 10-hectare planting on the northern side of the island. It's really, really important to kill the kikuyu. You have extraordinary challenges if you don't do that when you're planting. So don't be fooled, kikuyu is a killer, but when it's dead, it's one of the best mulches that you can ever have in a revegetation program. And what we found on Rotoroa was we had nearly as fast a regeneration rates in areas where we had kikuyu as well as where we had mulched sites. And it was also a really good protector for those salt winds, because you've got a little island that we took all the trees and shelter out of and then tried to plant natives on. So it's really important to maximise your investment and plant with passion. So even though our planters were mainly contractors, these guys were really invested in planting on Rotoroa, probably because, I shouldn't be saying it, there was a lot of fish around that they could have at the end of the day. But they also really enjoyed what they were doing on the island. They really believed in what they were doing. And I think a really important part of what we did is that, you know, we gave them a bit of a rule about how to plant, but we let them take over where they would plant things specifically. And in the later parts of our revegetation program, we did the same as Tiritiri, Motuora, and the extraordinary work that's being done on Motutapu. We did work with volunteers, and people love planting. I think one of the most extraordinary things to me was being out with planters one day, and I couldn't work out why these people weren't planting. And they said, "How do you dig a hole?" And that was pretty interesting. And then the second question, this is a lady with pink bows on her gumboots. The second question was, where do you put the dirt? And I had to be taken away on a stretcher at that point because I couldn't cope. But they're extraordinary people that come and do this work for us on islands. Another really important part of our revegetation program was learning by doing. Some of you will know that we've had, you know, extraordinary slips on Waiheke and Motutapu. I think there's 400 slips alone on Motutapu at the moment. We had the same on Rotoroa. We love winter. Winter's the best time for planting, but it's also when God gives us rain and God gives us slips, and it doesn't matter what you do with a digger, the mulch will come off the slopes. So that was extraordinarily challenging for us. So the next part that we did was rodent removal. We had Norway rats. They were eradicated by ground bait stations. But integrated management with animal pest control is really important. When people ask me what I do, I generally say that I'm a hired killer, because that's kind of a large part of the work that I do. Rotoroa was really lucky. Unlike places like Rangitoto and Motutapu, it only had rats and mice. But we created paradise for them. So we laid down this beautiful blanket of mulch. We created a wonderful warm nursery with all the plants that we planted. They ate our trees, they caused havoc in our houses, and they left our native species in tatters. Enter the Pied Piper. Myself, people like James Russell, great people from the Auckland Council and the Department of Conservation. Oops, sorry. How do I go back? Okay, oh, we'll be too far. We did an aerial bait drop in 2013 to get rid of the mice. Some of the mice that we had were 35 grams, so it's kind of like a little sausage, little fat sausage with 4 legs. We did 3 aerial bait drops with Skywork helicopters. That's done a huge amount of work in the Gulf, and to date we haven't had any mice come back. just a couple of things in here is that just want to really make a shout out for the Auckland Council and DOC's Treasure Island program. This is a collective responsibility, biosecurity, and the Treasure Islands program is a superb program that I know a lot of people are behind. Constant vigilance is essential once you've done an eradication, especially when you're sandwiched between those two islands. You kind of create a Cadbury factory. That's what we've done on Rotoroa. So we've got rid of all of our pests. We've got lots of rats that are Olympic swimmers from Waiheke and Ponui. We know they come from Waiheke and Ponui because there's the extraordinary people at Ecogene and Rachel Fuster at Auckland University who do what I call crime scene investigation on rats. So my husband hates it when we have rats on Rotoroa because I bring the tails home and put them in the freezer. And they just take a small piece from the tail and they can identify where those rats come from. So I'm sorry, people from Waiheke, my rats are coming from your place. So we had 10 rats between December and May of this year. It's never an if, it's a when, and you need to be able to plan for it. So again, that partnership with DOC and Auckland Council is really important. So just, I guess, sort of just another play for the Treasure Islands program and how important biosecurity is for us. And to all of you who have seen the benefits of eradication and aerial baiting, please help DOC and the Auckland Council and other councils keep this tool. They're incredibly important. At the moment, I'm involved with 2 baiting operations. One is Rotoroa Island that you all will have seen and heard about in the paper. People have got every right to have opposition to these things, but it's really important that people's information is accurate. And until we've got better tools, these are the key tools that we need to be able to make these places safe for our native species. Also, make sure that you use your tools widely. So Brodifacoum is a really widely used tool for rat eradication and rat control. Everywhere I go, I see that people don't pulse it, they just use it continuously. You have bioaccumulation in the environment and you start to blunt tools. So it's extraordinarily important that you work to the label specifications. The next part of Rotoroa is about recovery, and this might seem pretty strange. It was strange to me when we got rid of the mice, but I never realised that for 5 years when I worked out on the island, there was no sounds in the bush. There were no cicadas, there were no stick insects, there were no, what my Scottish dad used to call gollicans, which are cockroaches. There were none of those things in the bush. And with getting rid of rats and mice, those things started to come back, and it was a novelty to hear cicadas in the bush. It was a novelty to go out onto the beaches and see shore bindweed flowering, to look up the valleys on the coast and see ring and lilies flowering. So the impacts of rats and mice are quite extraordinary in these small island environments. Another thing that was really important was that our shorebirds started to come back. In the top left is Phil Salisbury came up with this fantastic idea of protecting our dotterels. So they've got these little, it's not trapping them in there, it's a little wire cage with a hole on the outside. The birds go in, sit in there, lay their eggs. The blackbacks can't get in there. It's a really good little system. The other extraordinary thing that came back was our oi, the grey-faced petrel. They're an incredibly resilient bird. We had some populations at the end of Pakatoa Point, and with getting rid of the rodents, that enabled those populations to recover. So that was an extraordinary, successful part of what we do. So the message here is that little things matter. If you don't have those ecosystem engineers, you have nothing. And I guess probably it culminated in the arrival on those of the pukekos on steroids, the takahe, that we're fortunate to have along with Motatapu and Tiritiri Mātangi. And I think one of the best things is the joy of visitors seeing the big budgies for the first time. They're an extraordinary bird. My first experience was with Blue on Tiritiri Mātangi. Some of you will remember him. The next really important part of Rotoroa was recreation. So we reopened the island to the public in December 2011 after 100 years of people not being able to go ashore on the island. I've heard lots of stories from people about boats anchoring off Rotoroa during the days that the inebriates were on the island and people swimming out with fish trying to get in return for things. I've heard stories about the island running out of water, and the only thing that the only big enough tankers they could bring out from Auckland on the barge were Lion Brewery's beer tankers filled with water. It was quite ironic. But I think being able to open the island, which is really the only sort of publicly accessible sanctuary in the southern part of the Hauraki Gulf, is pretty important. So we have houses to stay in, we have tracks to walk in, and we have beaches to swim on that rival the beaches of Motuihe, beautiful, sheltered, safe beaches. Where it gives people the opportunity to experience wildlife built in natural heritage. So we have the only museum in New Zealand that celebrates the heritage of the Sallies, and of course that restored environment in the southern Hauraki Gulf. Okay. So just to end off, with all of these projects, there's always a little bit of razzing that goes on. So one of the things that we got was that it's not proper revegetation. It contains species not found on Rotoroa, but we've got canopy closure in 5 years. And we were always really open that we weren't a pure revegetation program on the island. Weeds are down from 60 species. You are able to do what you've done because you had heaps of money. Lots of money means nothing if you don't have a well-planned system. Everything must be eco-sourced, and I do agree with that principle, but I'd like to throw at you that Kaka and Kereru don't eco-source. So we do need to be a bit realistic about the way that we think about some of these things. Nothing is an absolute in nature, it's all about adaptive management, so I make no apologies for what happened on the island. The island's too small to hold many native species. But we have partnerships with the Tākehei Recovery Program. Our Kiwi program works in with Kiwis for Kiwi and the Mautatapu Trust. So I think it's really important with a lot of these projects that we put away the scissors and we just learn from everybody about what's going on. So the results, just really quickly, lots of dead rats. We've got saddleback tieki, we've got Tākehei. The next foundation arose out of Rotoroa, so that's a $100 million fund that funds conservation, education and environmental work in New Zealand. We've got skinks, we've got our popokatea, we've got a publicly accessible sanctuary in the southern Hauraki Gulf, and we've got kiwi. Just finally, what makes Rotoroa work? We're not constrained by bureaucracy. We have a clear, pragmatic, innovative and strategic direction. We have a long-term vision and goals. All our stakeholders are actively engaged. We have an RIT project leader that we just deal directly with. We don't have to go through layers and layers. And we have secure long-term funding and a trusting relationship between the Sallies and RIT. The final 2 slides are just about what I consider to be challenges. John Lawrence and I are very much agreed on this one. There's no regular ferry service to Rotoroa. There's a monopoly in the Hauraki Gulf. I think Fuller's doing an extraordinarily good job, but the survival of these islands is really dependent on ferry services. I know with current work at Motatapu, not being able to get into home bay is a big challenge. Dogs on beaches. Dog owners don't read. Dog owners are consistently hard to deal with. Not all of them, but it's a very small minority. But these are people that are consistent re-offenders around the Gulf. And it's only time before we have a disastrous result. Rats, swimming rats, please get Waiheke pest-free. But the swimming rats are a real issue. They can swim quite big distances, and the more we make Cadbury factories, the further that they can swim. Yeah, just another plea. Well, please make Waiheke pest-free, and then Ponui. I'm not asking much. I think this is just this whole thing around tourism. I couldn't find a very good tourism picture of the Hauraki Gulf, so you get a caravan. So I think we need a collective approach to tourism marketing in the Hauraki Gulf rather than a competitive one. And we need a tourism strategy that is the collective reflection of all of the parties. We've got the America's Cup coming now. It's a massive opportunity. And finally, I'd just like to say relationships are everything. I'm not an expert at what I do, I just know an extraordinary number of very good people, and I take on projects and I haven't got a clue how I'm going to do them, but I've got someone that I can ring up to say, what the hell were you thinking, and always help me with what I'm doing. So I'd just like to say that we're endlessly grateful to our rangers. This is Kevin and Tony, who are our current rangers on the island. Hugely grateful to the Auckland Council, Auckland Zoo, the Department of Conservation, Kiwis for Kiwi, Thames Coast Kiwi, and all of these other people. Thank you very much.